Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this, well, the last morning of the Munich Security Conference. I know it's been a whirlwind. I'm sure the President will agree. And again, thank you for joining us. I'm sure you're very tired by now from your speaking arrangements. I'm Antoaneta Roussi, and I'm the cyber and intelligence reporter at POLITICO, based in Brussels. And today, I'm sitting down with Finnish President Alexander Stubb. So again, welcome, Mr. President, and thank you for your participation. So we've got 15 minutes, so I'm just going to launch in. Finnish authorities recently seized Eagle ship in December in an all-guns blazing operation, suspecting it had sabotaged a subsea power link connecting Estonia to Finland. And earlier this year, NATO launched a Baltic sentry to improve allies' ability to respond to destabilizing attacks in the Baltic Sea, which have become increasingly frequent. So my question is, are there two fronts on Europe's borders, one in Ukraine and another one, a hybrid one, emerging in the Baltic Sea?
Yeah, I think we have two types of warfare. One is kinetic traditional warfare, which we're seeing in Ukraine with Russia's war of aggression, technologically advanced, but nevertheless. And the other one is then hybrid warfare, which has many different manifestations. I mean, as you will know, cyber, sabotage, information, many other ways. So basically in the Baltic Sea, we had within a year, roughly 5 cable incidents of varying degrees. In the first one, it was a Chinese ship, New Polar Bear, and we let it go, or we didn't really understand what had happened. And the procedures are ongoing, actually, in Hong Kong. Chinese are cooperating on this. Then there were 2 where basically things slipped through, or the ships were in economic waters, but not territorial waters, which means that you can't sort of board them or take over. And then on Christmas Day, as we were spending Christmas with my British family, because for me Christmas Eve is the actual day, Christmas Day, the phone started to go a little bit on the hot side, and our authorities informed us of an operation. First, they got the information from a private data cable company. Within an hour and a half, they were able to identify 2 prospective ships that have crossed that path and that could have cut the 1+3 cables. And then they went on an operation which wasn't all guns blazing. It sounds a bit too dramatic. It was actually pulling a ship next to it and having a helicopter over it, and then saying that please move into Finnish territorial waters, your anchor is down, you have damaged a couple of cables. 3 Georgian seamen and 21 Indian in the crew. And they moved over to Finnish territorial waters, and in that sense, for us, at that point, the operation was over. We were able to board the ship, confiscate it, and then take it ashore. So it was a successful operation on Eagle S.
And in that case, was Eagle S actually found to have sabotaged the cable?
The investigations are still ongoing, and my take in these kinds of events is that you kind of have 3 options or possibilities. 1 is that it's a mistake, 2 is that it's done on purpose, and 3 that it's incompetence. And then you can have a combination of the 2, so mistake and incompetence, and the worst ones are on purpose but incompetent. So the investigations are still ongoing. For us, the key is obviously to try to prevent these things in the future and to be able to basically repair the cables quickly enough. So we did a strategic operation after that, decided to convene the leadership of Mark Rutte, NATO's Secretary General, a informal Allies Baltic Sea NATO summit in Helsinki on the 14th of December, and decided to do 3 things in order to prevent this in the future. One was better infrastructure, undersea drones to be able to not only map but control what was going on in the Baltic Sea. The second one was a Baltic sentry NATO operation with X amount of ships and other equipment to make sure that we have good control of the shadow fleet. And then the third one is this sort of reflection on, without violating the freedom of navigation and international law of the sea, what can we do? So if there's a clear case for an environmental disaster, we can board the ship even if it's not in our territorial waters. If it's piracy, we can board the ship. So we're looking at different ways of dealing with it. But so far so good. But I do believe that we will see more of these incidents, unfortunately, in the future.
European countries are actually holding behind-the-scenes talks on seizures of Moscow's oil-exporting tankers in the Baltic Sea. known also as the shadow fleet, which is continuing to fund the Russian economy. The proposals being considered include grabbing vessels, as you say, on environmental or piracy grounds. But could Europe be exacerbating the situation by placing blame on sabotage, when actually a lot of the intelligence services, including EU INCENT, say that the last 4 cases have been accidental damage?
Well, I think intelligence services, civil or military in different countries, sometimes don't always agree on the final outcome of a particular event. And of course, there are many different types of events. I'm sure, if there was clear evidence that this is sabotage, then there would be attribution. As far as the overall thinking is concerned, we are now looking at various ways in which to do this without violating the freedom of navigation. And I think the key here is to think about the Russian shadow fleet as a bloodline or an artery for oil exports. Roughly 50% of Russia's oil exports go on tankers with the shadow fleet. Americans sanctioning some of them was very useful, so that's reduced a little bit the traffic. And we have to look at different perspectives of it. I think it's a careful balance here, because I think the Russians are genuinely afraid that we might do something which stops this artery working. So I think right now we've got the balance right. What we do in the future is still a little bit up in the air.
In the previous session with my director Jamil Andalini, one of the questions was, isn't it time to actually freeze Russian assets rather than just, talking about seizing them? And it seems that if 50% of Russian shadow fleet goes through the Baltic Sea and is such an important artery, shouldn't the Baltic countries be doing something about it?
Yeah. Well, I was in the previous session actually on stage with Jamil as well, so we have a similar experience here. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. If you're talking about the frozen assets, in other words, the roughly 300 billion that are in different places in Europe, I do actually support the idea of using those frozen assets to help Ukraine, but just now outright say that we're going to freeze these ships. I mean, it's just a violation of international law, and you can't do that. It's much more complicated than that. So we just have to make sure that no major environmental catastrophes take place. We have to make sure that no more cables on. But stopping the ships as such is a little bit more complicated. There was a borderline environmental disaster where one of the ships was, I think, in the harbor in St. Petersburg and began to sort of take in water and had some explosions, but fortunately that had been contained.
Mm-hmm. So you can't literally just block Russian
No, you can't.
ships.
You can't literally do that. I mean, it's just against international law. And, and again, you have to think about the ramifications. I mean, it might sound like an appealing idea, but you have to think about the ramifications. Okay, what are the Chinese then going to say in the Taiwan Straits? How about other freedom of navigation? So we can't live in this sort of, jungle of tankers around. There has to be control. We have to know where they're going. Sometimes it's a little bit more complicated, but just to stop them full on, it's not possible.
The Lithuanian foreign minister called the Baltic Sea now the NATO lake since Finland and Sweden joined NATO. Has that changed? You're joining the alliance. Has that changed your attitude? Has that changed the feeling in the country of security? Can you just tell me about that?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, Finns are quite sort of cool, calm, and collected at any state. We've always been very serious about our own security. So even before NATO membership, we have obligatory military service. So I did mine. My son just finished his. We have 900,000 men and women that have gone through that service. We have 280,000 men and women that can be mobilized at wartime. We have 62 F-18s. We just bought 64 F-35s. We have long-range missiles, air, sea, and land. We have the biggest artillery in Europe together with Poland. And as I always say, we don't have that because we're worried about Stockholm, right? We've always been worried about Moscow and of Russia. So we came well prepared. We were probably more NATO compatible than most NATO member states. We spend 2.5% of our GDP on defense already now. If you sort of roughly then take that a conscription or obligatory military service is 0.5, then you're already up to 3%, right? So we're serious about it. We came into the alliance doubling the border of NATO with Russia as a security provider, not a security consumer. And of course, we feel more secure as a part of the alliance. And the big thing for us is never to be alone again. But I think the alliance is quite happy to have us as well.
In the context of President Donald Trump's remarks about acquiring Greenland, the Arctic has gained new attention. And in fact, the head of the Russian Navy recently said in St. Petersburg that the Arctic is where the confrontation of the world's leading states is unfolding. So my question to you is the next frontier the Arctic? And if so, how should the EU be thinking about security there, since it has a respectively large border?
Yeah, the answer is yes, but I think we've been working on the Arctic already for a long time. I remember when I was foreign minister back then, I think 2008, 2011, I participated in the meetings of the Arctic Council, which actually included 7 Arctic states, plus then, of course, Russia. And then we had 3 pillars. We talked about environment, so climate change, black suit and these kinds of things. Then we talked about the economy, so the routes which open at wintertime. Little commercial break here, icebreakers. Finland has built 60% of the world's icebreakers and designed 80% of the world's icebreaker. We build them extremely fast and they're much cheaper than anyone else. End of commercial break. So that's one part of it. But then security is one part of it as well. And I think this is where we have to be very adamant and work with our Arctic partners and allies, Canada, the United States, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Iceland, to make sure that we're well enough protected. And I actually think, jokes aside, icebreakers are a big part of this. But we're talking about a vast area where Norway and Russia have already settled their border demarcations, but we have places like Svalbard, which are strategically important. So we'll see. But I do think it's an extremely important battlefield of the future.
And something that perhaps not just the Scandinavian countries, but the entire EU should be thinking about collectively. It's one bloc. It's one European Union security bloc.
Definitely, it's the High North, and it's a very important part of our whole security strategy and the way in which we defend ourselves. So the EU needs to have it on the agenda, but remember also that NATO has it on the agenda. And if I'm not mistaken, we're actually preparing a Arctic Strategy 2.0. When I was foreign minister, actually, we prepared our first Arctic strategy a long time ago, I think 2010. So important area, and we are one of the few non-sea-bound Arctic states. So we're not, connected through the high north to the sea, like for instance, Norway. But we look at the defense of Norway, Sweden, and Finland as one entity up there, especially in the Arctic.
Sorry, the Arctic security, the strategy is Finland.
Finnish, that was
NATO.
Finnish, yeah.
Okay.
But NATO is now hopefully preparing some kind of an, Arctic strategy as well.
Okay, and one, I can't leave you without asking about your reaction to the now upcoming meeting of the US administration and the Russian administration in Saudi Arabia on Ukraine's future. Noticeably, there are no Europeans on that table.
Yeah, well, my take is that we're looking at a 3-stage process here. One is pre-negotiation. This is where we need to put extreme pressure on Russia through sanctions, frozen assets, and increasing and supporting Ukrainian military.
Is
we,
Europe...
Europe and the United States.
Collectively?
Yes.
Right.
And then we need to start talking about security arrangements. So this is the phase where we are right now. So this is the beginning of the beginning, and a lot of people are going to be talking. Would I prefer the United States not to be speaking directly with Russia and certainly having Ukraine and Europe involved? Yes, I would prefer that. But if that is not the situation, then we have to basically convince the Americans that Europeans have skin in the game. I think our problem in Europe quite often is that we talk a lot and we do a little. Right now the ball is in our court. We have to make ourselves relevant in these negotiations and understand that it's not only about Ukraine's future, it's also about the future of European security. And I actually think it's also about the future of the United States as a superpower. The United States if it wants to retain that position, has to have allies, and 25% of its allies, at least, well, over 50% of its allies, but 25% of the world's countries come from Europe. So I think that we need to work on this together. And just to finish off, I think there's been a lot of diplomatic cacophony this weekend. And as a Finn, I just say that, slow down, calm down, take an ice bath, go in the sauna, reflect over the situation and find a solution. We human beings, we over-rationalize the past, so we draw these examples from the past. We over-dramatize the present, which we're doing right now, and then therefore we underestimate the future. So let's just look at what's going on. Let's continue the transatlantic alliance. Let's continue the dialogue with the Americans, and good will come out of this.
If the Americans will listen to you,
they
right?
will. I mean, again,
they didn't invite you to the party.
Well, I mean,
you'll be sitting in the sauna by yourself.
You never know. But no, I mean, look, this weekend here, I had a one-on-one with Kellogg. I had a meeting with 15 senators. I had one-on-ones with American senators. So I don't call them parties, but I call them discussions. And I take away much more optimism about the future of the transatlantic relationship right now. But we do have to understand that it is changing. And then the question is, how much responsibility does Europe take, and how do we make sure that the United States still remains engaged?
And still listens.
Still, well, I mean, I won't reveal the phone conversations that I've had over this weekend, but the Americans listen. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, President.
Thanks.